Hi everyone, and welcome to Dance Rehab Dialogues, a space for dance teachers, parents, and movers who want to be part of a more thoughtful, dancer-centered health ecosystem. I'm Dr. Robert Tsai. I am a dance performance physical therapist and the founder of Dance Rehab Physical Therapy and Performance. Whether you're guiding a young dancer, imagining greater possibilities, or continuing your own movement journey later in life, we're here to explore how preparation, communication, and care can evolve with you. Let's make space for your questions and your curiosity so we can set the stage for sustainability, health, and longevity for ourselves and for future generations of movement artists. Let's chat. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Dance Rehab Dialogues with my good friend Aaron Ngor. Today's conversation is titled Reframing Recovery, and this will be part one of two parts of this discussion. So Aaron is a certified athletic trainer. He's also a strength and conditioning coach and a perpetual student of life. He's a dancer, and I first met Aaron when he was a student at a studio that I was teaching at when I was in college, and Aaron was in junior high school. So our lives have really continued to intertwine ever since, both in terms of dance performance, dance health, both recreationally, but also professionally as well. So for part one, I invite you to sit in on this discussion of what we've seen as dance students and dancers ourselves, and what we're currently seeing as dance educators and healthcare professionals that support young athletes. A lot of these patterns, behaviors, and questions that we often get, things that are often showing up over and over again, especially in the recovery conversation. So how does this fit into what your life is and what your role as a teacher or parent or administrator is, and how can we really redefine this recovery conversation? Let's bring those things to light. Let's chat. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this session, this Sunday Space / Dance Rehab Dialogue session now. And I am very, very honored, and very privileged to be in the presence of Aaron Ngor.
Oh my gosh, goes both ways.
There's some history. There's a lot of history, actually, in a good way. I know sometimes people are like, oh, there's history. And you're like, oh my God. Nah. So I have been very fortunate, I think, to learn from you in like multiple ways. And I think, not necessarily always academic or within sort of our current role of like health and wellness for performing artists, but I think also just watching the way that you have navigated your own life and how it has ebbed and flowed. I know you do. Most people probably in this world know that you have done, some performing arts work,
Yep.
In the health realm, but also you have had a wide variety of experience in that you have, well, one, not just recovered from your own injury, but two, you've also been in the collegiate realm. You've also been in the dance science realm. You've also been in the theme park realm. Shout out to all our homies still there in Anaheim. I don't know if I can officially say the name, but
You can.
yeah, we can. Okay, great. Shout out to all the Disney PTs and ATCs out there. I mean, the list goes on, man. I mean, you present, you are, you worked with USA Break-In, you've taught for CLI, you continue to work with Doctors for Dancers. Oh my God. So just me fanboying over here. But
Rob opened the door.
I don't know about that, man. Well, what continues to be on my brain too is when I had the opportunity to learn from you when I was a teacher and you were a student in these roles back in the rec studio days.
That's what I mean. You opened the door for this. Like, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I had not found what I needed in a teacher and in dance. It's like the timing of it was just like, I could have left dance because I didn't find like the right community for it.
Yeah. Even beyond that, I think you have also been like a wonderful connector. And I think the both of us kind of ebb and flow in our own ways in various different communities. Mm-hmm. And I think, and in some ways almost being able to code switch between all the different communities.
It's important.
Yeah. And I think you do that very, not just like tactfully, but also very wonderfully, and being able to see the people in the community that you're serving. And I think that's a testament to how you can be so influential in the areas that you are. So once again, I am very honored and privileged. So thank you. Thank you. Especially on this Sunday morning. Yeah. And then beyond that, I mean, you also went back and got your master's in sports product management.
That's a whole nother story that I'm still, that's like the newest chapter, I feel like, in my life that's like unraveling. But yeah, even now, so many connection points.
Yes.
What I'm doing.
Yeah.
And what I've been doing.
I love that. I love that. It is, it is so wonderful to see your journey. And I think I'm just really excited to see where you take all of that, because it's like,
me too.
you and I both. It's like, oh my God, I guess we'll see what happens. What are we doing? People are always like, oh my God, I love what you do. And I'm so grateful for comments like that. Yes. The little affirmations are helpful. And then sometimes I boil it back down and I'm like, just a guy that's interested in a lot of things. And I think you also embody that really well, where you are driven by interests, but more importantly, you are driven by curiosity. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just like asking like the right questions and being able to provide answers that are, not just right answers, but answers that are contextual, that make sense for not just the body and the physical space, but also culture, history, politics, if you will, right? In all shapes and forms. And yeah, being able to, we always like to say, right, human behind the dancer. And I think you do truly embody that. So thank you. Thank you for your...
what a great intro.
Am I missing anything else?
Let's get to it. Let's get to it.
So today's conversation is titled Reframing Recovery. And I think this is important because recovery can take a wide range of definitions.
Yep.
Once again, going back to that idea of like recovery can mean different depending on context, depending on person, depending on a multitude of factors, right? Physical, psychosocial, etc. And so more specifically in our work as physical therapists and more niched down into the populations we treat, which is youth and adolescent, in a highly competitive dance learning environment and experience, we're often having to talk about recovery from injury, but also having to do load management and making sure that they can heal, but also perform at the same time. We'd love to say, hey, don't dance at all, appropriately recover and come back. But the truth is that I will probably say that that's just not a reality.
Yeah.
In theory, we would like ourselves to take the time, but in reality, what we see is that there's just one thing after the other. And so obviously having to manage injuries that way and setting expectations. So there's a lot of stuff that says, oh, a tendon will take like X amount of time to heal. And for many dancers, it's just having to stretch that out too, because looking at what they need to do, you're just looking at their overall loading. So recovery and injury. The other part of this I would like to hit on is, and more specifically, is recovery for performance, because I think that is a really big missing piece. And it's not that we don't know the information. I think it's more about application. Yeah, application of information. And you worked with a lot of high performance athletes where you have to make, as an athletic trainer, making those like very sort of real-time decisions in the moment.
Constraint-based decisions.
Yes. Yeah. So definitely want to hit on that. And then would also love to chat a little bit more about, what you've seen and perhaps combine it with some things I've seen working in these like similar environments, kind of where, if you're an educator or an administrator listening to this, maybe some things that we're thinking about as healthcare providers, having been in a multitude of different environments, and what sorts of messages are relatively consistent, right?
Asking the big questions.
I mean, we're here for the big questions, so who knows? But yeah, let's start there in terms of the high performance athlete. I think that's the thing that most people probably are like,
sure.
I got to do my back-to-back competitions 5 weeks in a row, which is kind of where we're at right now in the early summer months. What are your thoughts in terms of dancers having to do things back to back? Obviously, we want them to set up long term, but let's say like in the moment, in those types of conversations, what do you feel like are the questions that you get when it comes to performance recovery in the moment, and what are the actionable things for dancers or even families to think about, educators?
I think that's a really big question and important question, but I also want to frame it in like there's different tiers and levels of what high performance and what a high performance athlete specifically is. And, to set the stage, what most people would consider like their number one superstar, the person they look up to the most, and you look at all the incredible things they've done, it's not like it was like a perfect event. And if anything, you'll find that most athletes, or even the most elite ones, and when I say elite, like imagine preparing 4 years to run for 10 seconds, right? I know dancers, will prepare like months to prepare for like a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely.
imagine like that type of time horizon. And a lot of them, they'll do everything they can. And there's on one hand, there's a bit of faith. I'm like, when I wake up the next day, I hope it's a great day. And then the other hand, there's resilience. If it's not a great day and the conditions aren't perfect, do I have the will within me to perform my best and set that expectation that I can still give my best effort today?
Yeah.
I think it's a fine balance between obsessing over the optimization of like recovery. This word I got from Anthony, who's the founder of Hyperice, which is actually, he's out here.
Oh,
And HQ is in Irvine.
I didn't know that.
They're now putting this concept of pre-recovery instead of prehab in that space.
Pre-recovery.
But then on the other side of that is like, if you go too far, then you're starting to like go into the realms of like biohacking and try to do like shortcutting.
Yes.
Which again, there are pros and cons. We as the medical and performance staff, we try and help weigh the risk and benefits of each, especially at that elite level. But then on the other side of that, it's all the training, all the prep work, all the work that no one sees that's supposed to build this other factor called resilience.
Yes.
So that when the day is not perfect or the conditions aren't perfect, they have the resolve to push and be a competitor at the end. And I think that's a big difference between like I see in arts and sports, is that sometimes in the arts, it's like, you can pause things and like choose to like move it if the vision isn't perfect.
Yeah.
But I think in sports, it's like, this is the day, this is the competition, you show up or not. And then if you don't, it's a loss. If you do, congrats, it's a win. But then there's always the next opportunity. And so having this like push-pull, I think can be translated to the dancer if they know that this competition, there will always be the next one if they take care of their bodies well. Because I feel like if you get into more of a scarcity mindset of like, this might be my last competition, I'm literally like redlining to get here. And it might. If you get hurt, it might. ACL, Achilles tear, it might for a while. But if you have, if you've done the work, you've done the prep, you may not be the best and you still show up to compete. It's like, you may not get the win, the reward of that prep, but that's where the resilience comes in to like go back to the drawing board, work on the things you need to work on, build the strength you need to work on, adapt, recover, and then show up again. Right?
Yeah. No, I love, once again, context, right, is huge. And I think for us, once again, we're working with a competitive environment, but I think it's also just being able to guide them to see, hey, but what is your goal?
Yeah.
After the thing that you're thinking about. And so for example, and I just want to, there's a couple points you mentioned that I want to just like bring up and acknowledge. Number one, about like this idea of like resilience, right? And we think of resilience as like being able to like handle anything, which is typically sort of that narrative that we hear a lot within the dance space. But resilience really, as we know it, especially mental resilience, is your ability to pivot and shift.
Yep.
Right. So resilience isn't about being like 1,000% all the time, but it's your ability to I would even say, hey, I can't do this right now, but I know how to get there, and having the resilience to be able to say today's going to be like a slower day.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to think about some different things that can help, optimize my performance, which brings me to my next point, which is this whole idea of optimization of performance.
Yeah.
And I think, we do talk about the elite athlete. We do talk about, and once again, we're very lucky and privileged to work with a subset of pre-professional dancer that does end up at professional companies, that does end up, on world-renowned stages at a relatively young age. But when we see that, we're kind of thinking like, oh yeah, that's the goal. But then we can't forget about just your regular situations, your sleep, your hydration, or your mental health. Yeah, your just like overall physicality. And I think going back to this idea of recovery, it's like, yeah, like you were saying, it's like sometimes it's like biohacking, but I don't even think we're at this place where we can even think about biohacking. We're just like, look, you need those human foundations to be filled. And if we can't fill that, how do you even build up on top of everything else? And I think that, right, that is probably more of a contextual cultural question given our population. So
when I think about the young pre-professional adolescent dancer, I'm not a father yet, but I've worked with enough younger kids to know that they're still just kids. They're not like small adults. And I even think that for the kids that I work with who are like in these, and they're older, like they're in these like pre-professional leagues where, whether it's for like hockey or sport, like they're still on development teams.
Yeah.
And then I think about the young superstars that people know in day to day, like, these guys who are entering the NFL and NBA are like in their early 20s still. And we know that, at least for a male brain, doesn't really develop until like age 25.
Oh, my wife would argue that it's probably still developing, but
But when I think about it in that lens, and I think about the most important lessons that like cause me to like learn more about health, wellness, and longevity, it's because something really bad happened, right? Yeah. I stayed up all night, played video games, and then now I have to like get up, get in my parents' car, and they have to drop me off at practice, and I feel like terrible. And then, some other kids like, I know what's going to solve this. Take an energy drink. And you do that, and then you finally get to the venue and you have tech, and then, you finish tech, you haven't eaten anything, and then you like crash out. And then you're like, oh, well, the performance like 2 hours away, then I got to eat something. And then, I'm thinking like, this World Dance, like back in like 2000.
Yes.
Like I'm like in the convention center. What's there? Oh, a hot dog stand. Yes. I'll take that. And then I feel like wanting to throw up. And I got that experience like in high school. Yeah. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to this. And I think on one hand, like if you're a parent and you do know a lot more about this, then there is a certain responsibility to like guide, but not micromanage the process, to have the authority to kind of just be like, here are your options, and like, just do it because I'm your parent and I'm looking after you. It's good. It's in good interest. And if they choose not to, then, you did your best.
Yeah.
But, in my case, when my parents didn't know, I think there is also a learning lesson to just like, kids are going to learn and grow and figure things out on their own. They're going to make bad decisions. They're going to make bad choices, but it also doesn't define them for the rest of their career. I'm still meeting dancers now who are like in the, you could say that, you've watched their videos and taken their classes and they're going on tour and they're like, oh my God, they're the greatest. They must have everything so dialed. And they're still unlearning, making bad choices, relearning, looking back and be like, well, if I had done this, I would have felt better.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's like a lifelong process, but it's a matter of like stacking these skills. Like what's something I can like get right now? And, if I again bring back the conversation to like the young pre-professional dancer, it might just be like trying to get good at one of those like pillars and foundations. Right. If I'm thinking about myself, I probably wouldn't really count sleep. I didn't really get good at that later. But what I did learn and what I was interested at the time was like, I wouldn't call it nutrition back then. I would just be like, oh, like I want to lose weight. Let me try a protein shake and see how I feel with that. And then be like, wait, I probably need more food. And so it's like you make these little decisions and very much like cause and effect, right? And so that's like an easy way to be like, okay, what is this doing to my body? Just like when parents, their kids get a fever or they get hurt and, the first thing they do is like, well, I hope not the first thing they do, but I have heard that it's like, oh, do you want ibuprofen? Do you want like some medication? And if the kid didn't know what it did, they might try it first out of curiosity. But then if it actually did what it was supposed to do, then the next time they're asked to do that, they'll say yes, because they said A plus B equals C.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they've been taught.
Right. It's what they've been
Whether
taught.
by a person or an experience.
Or an experience.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to structure these kind of like experiences where it may not be that route, and it's a little bit like more geared towards like another way of like healing or recovery, they may be able to onboard on that earlier. And then as they like move through spaces, start to realize like, oh, not everyone's doing this.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love the point that you're hitting on. What is the experience, right? Because I think we can, and I think this is just with watching how the world has changed from even in like the last 20 years, like the information is there. Being able to provide the information is one thing. And I think this is what I've learned over my years, like teaching workshops. I think before it was really easy to say, hey, I'm going to teach like an injury prevention workshop. Here's a couple of exercises, go. But it wasn't necessarily about the fact that they were learning about necessarily injury prevention, but that it was a novel experience.
Yeah.
And, you know,
it's the exercise, but it's not about the exercise.
It absolutely is not about the exercise, right? And that's changed over time, because I think now if you were to, and this is not, I mean, of course, depending on the age group, right? If you're teaching like a group of dancers who have never like done a glute bridge ever, then of course that's going to be a novel experience to them. But I think we're getting to this point where, you know, when I go and teach workshops and being able to read the room, I have to ask like, what have you learned before? What have you retained? And what do you actually continue to apply? And then, of course, that last question is the one where I'm like, okay, I have this like giant thing of stuff in my brain, and how do I narrow it down to what the room needs?
Yes.
And that's always going to change a little bit. So I know in the context of exercise and movement, it's a lot more easier entry point for dancers because it's movements, part of, right? Yeah. So there is a kinesthetic and kinesiological understanding of self that is both, you know, obviously conscious, but in some level subconscious too. And recovery is one of those things where, like, how do you get them to experience recovery? Like that, you know, and I go from the standpoint of, you know, minor like sidetrack here for in my physical movement work. I'm a very big proponent of physical literacy, teaching dancers that they can move in other ways outside of dance, mostly because they silo themselves into these, you know, the dance technique, which is fine. But, you know, one of the best comments I got after teaching this year was, there was a few dancers that said, I asked them like, hey, what did you learn from like this year overall? What's like the biggest lesson you take away? And a few of them were like, I learned I could catch a ball and actually like do it with confidence. And I was like, that has nothing to do with dance. But the fact that you have taken something that you felt not confident in, had the experience of messing up and figuring it out, and now you're like, great, hand-eye coordination, solid, you'll need that for life, right? But the fact that they were able to change the mentality about learning a movement that maybe seemed that they never would have given themselves the chance to, what has that done for their learning process, right? Reeling back in, what, you know, how do you recreate, or how do you even create a recovery experience that they would be able to understand and feel a difference in their body? And how do you do that? Let's say, kind of putting you on the spot here, right? I mean, we can all talk about long term, which is like, can you get your sleep? Can you get your hydration? Like those types of things. And over time, you know, once you start checking in and you have the space for them to check in, they can definitely feel a difference. That's some of the topics that we were able to hit on, and at least like give them some awareness of it. But how do you do that in like a short period of time? And this may depend on their body. This may depend on their experience. What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's a big challenge when it comes to making things make sense.
I think, you know, to your point, like physical movement can be viewed as a panacea for a lot of feelings and emotions that may be built up over a course of training and like just living. I think that's why dancers, like when you, and I don't know, like if in your particular group, but if you ask the dancers like why they got into dance or what does like dance do for them, you know, I think rarely is it, will they respond back because like, oh, because like I could do a triple pirouette and everyone gives me claps for it. It's usually something a little bit more. So I think like movement itself as a broad topic can serve as like, you know, we get the physical benefits of it. Sometimes, you know, it can be more for like the emotional and like mental benefit of it, just to like get your mind into a different headspace and almost like let this like physical world kind of melt away a bit, or even for like the spiritual side of things where it's like, I want to feel something greater than myself right now, that I'm like a part of something more. And I think as like young kids that maybe feel like there's, you know, they may not feel safe in a lot of places or in society or in the world. The need for like connection, the need for community grows, but also how do you find that within yourself? And I think we use dance as a medium to do that, whether we know it or not. So to create, like you said, like a short-term experience to allow them to like redefine or change their idea or experience with recovery. I think it really is, I guess the most powerful for me is like you change the environment and you change like the implements, right? I think the reason why like, you know, cold baths and sauna are super popular is because like you physically have to like change this like environment of like, I'm in a very temperate room and I feel very comfortable. And then all of a sudden, like I need to adapt to something very uncomfortable, or like or the space kind of like signals you, like if you're in a sauna, it's like you're in a closed space. It's usually dark, it's quiet, which is very different than being inside a dance room where there's music and there's people talking. So, you know, like the story of like the girl said, oh, what'd you learn? It's like, I learned how to catch a ball with confidence, right? When they leave the studio, they're integrated back into society where not everyone's a dancer. If anything, it's like, you know, I think there is a view of like, because like you dance, it's like still not something that can like give you a lot of respect or like pay you well. It's like when you look at it from like an athlete perspective of what people know, they know basketball or know football.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
And like there's people can relate to that more. And I've found growing up is that like if you tell someone you're a dancer, what they're going to relate to is what they see on social media, right? The TikTok dances, the music videos, TV shows, right? Which is a great relational point, but that may not be what you identify as an artist, right? Like it's very hard to navigate that conversation and feel like, oh, like I feel accepted and like comfortable to show my skill with you and like share sport. Versus like, can you catch a ball? Yeah, I catch a ball. And you want to toss the ball around and like, oh, cool. Like I can teach you this. I can do this. Like, how do you like build these organic relationships on the playground and in the studio? Which I don't know if dancers really get to realize that, or their parents get to realize that as much, because, you know, the conversation that you and I talk about and I still hear is like this almost like early sports specialization within dance, where it's like, you know, you start really young, you get really good, and then let's push you to pre-professional. Let's push you to professional, and let's have you like build a career out of that.
Yeah. So, yeah, going to your point, talking about recovery specifically, or at least recovery in the experience of the human who has chosen dance. In ballet, you're looking at a lot of these kids who are headed off to year-round training programs under a company at probably 14 or 15, if not younger in some cases. And it's not very different from someone who's going to college off at 18, right?
Yeah.
Or someone who's graduated college or finished a pre-professional training program and they're going to a professional company at sometimes even as young as like 19, 20, you know. I'm very fortunate to, once again, work with this like subset of elite, if you will, youth dancers. And yeah, and I think those are just sort of the things to talk about, because if we were to go back to this idea of like creating a recovery experience that is valuable and easily applied, you're looking at how do you do this for someone who's at 15 and operating at that level. And probably the same thing for like gymnasts. Yes. Yeah.
Really. Like in order for it to be like top of mind, to make sure it's executed, to make sure that they're on board. And that's why I have so much respect, and also like want to tell instructors and coaches, like they set the tone, they set the standard, they set the culture, right? Like coming in as a healthcare professional, it's very hard to do that because you're not there every day with them, teaching them the lessons, giving them the advice, being with them, communicating with the parents. Like their role is so central that if their understanding of the overall mission and stuff is not, you know, where you want it to be, it's going to be very hard to raise it up on your end. That's why like collegiate programs and professional programs at the biggest levels scout and like interview and pay their coaches millions of dollars, because they know that if they pick the right one, the team will kind of like morph around it, because they set the standards, they set the code of conduct. And, you know, once you have that on board, it's much easier to implement systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Systems. We'll definitely chat systems and frameworks. Yeah. And once again, this is sort of a very, open-ended discussion. I think we're just like thinking about the things that we see and what are the ways that are absolutely applicable, right? And you were talking about the going back to that idea of like short term, and how, you kind of have to start with those short term experiences of what that is. And so I think as an educator, or perhaps as, if you're someone in a space that you have like upcoming things. And so in my head, I'm thinking for the studio teacher or director, if you have that competition coming up, and let's say, for the sake of this example, let's just say like a one-off, right?
Sure.
A one-off example. What are some ways that we can start talking about in the moment preparation? And even in the moment preparation is like, you're talking like a week. That's a moment, right? we still get a lot of dancers who are like, what are the recovery things that I can do in between my pieces? And you're talking like half an hour, 45 minutes. And yes, there are things you could do.
Yeah, we can break it up.
But what you are able to do in those 45 minutes is going to be predicated on what you are able to do over the course of the week. And it's going to be based off of what you do. It just gets bigger and bigger. So until you get down to just like, look, are you sleeping as a human? So yeah, I think
individual dancer or team. We're talking like team.
Let's talk team, because I feel like that's where, and this, I literally worked with a dancer earlier this week that had 12 competition pieces in one day. So yes, so there's an individual, but let's say team, because I think you're thinking about, managing a group. And I think this is the thing, right? Everyone's recovery needs are going to be different. So how do you have like succinct conversations about it? So in some conversations I've had in the past, or at least like tried to instill into a few educators that we work with, it's looking at, what's happening that week before. I'm going to default into this whole like optimization thing, because that's where my brain is. And I'm also in some ways like unlearning that. I know in our work, we often have to go with like numbers just to be able to prove that something's working, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm always saying, hey, maybe there are ways to track, even at the root of it, just like muscle soreness and fatigue, right? And there's a lot of different scales that you can utilize. The one I feel like I tend to come back to is the Hooper-Mackinnon one: sleep quality, sleep hours, sleep quality, mood, muscle soreness, and fatigue. And it's on like a 1 to 7 scale. Implementation is going to be hard, right? If you have a group of like 20, or sometimes if you have a group of 40, how are you like assessing these things? And what are sort of these actionable things? I think, on my end, I'm a Google Sheets fiend. And so I know how to craft things like that, where dancers can, scan something really quick, and they can see, the coach can see, wow, everyone's like in the red. And if you knew that as a coach, would that change the way that you're coaching, or would that change the way you're scheduling things? Or
have you been able to have that conversation and provide visuals yet?
I have been able to do it in a class setting. So
what was that?
Me to individuals.
Oh, you didn't.
Yeah, me to individuals. So me to my class.
Yeah.
I have had conversations about me to coach to class, or me to teacher to class. But I think another conversation about this is that I think today's dance educator just is holding so much, right? Yeah. So your mentor, educator, choreographer, your own assistant, you have to talk to parents. Yeah, and then you got to manage injuries, and you got to be like health and wellness, and then you got a strength and condition. Like, holy moly, right? But like you were saying, there's teams for these things.
It literally seems like, let me tell you a story.
And dance has yet to get there, right? So, you wouldn't tell, I'm just, as an example, you wouldn't tell the pitching coach to do all of those things.
No.
Right? Never in a million years. Yeah.
I mean, even like the questions that you're saying is the same problems that like NBA performance staff. Like just because we measure something, their players will be like, I feel like with maybe a younger group, they just will trust you and will do it. But these like older guys and girls will be like, why the heck am I doing this for if nothing's going to change?
Yes.
And it wasn't until like you track and identify a metric that's like meaningful, and then you can present that to the staff, the administration to implement a change, and then the players trust that that's going to be met with a good outcome. That's going to be in their benefit and not on the organization, because remember, they're like, also it's a money deal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Funding,
player value perception and all that stuff. And I'm sure it works in this company as well. Like you as an individual dancer, I think there's a lot of weights to carry when you feel like you may not be like their favorite or top person in the company, and you feel like you have to grind and work your way up. And then, just when things hurt and things are not feeling well, just feel like I'm just going to shut this down and just keep working so that I get perceived better.
Yeah.
It's funny because I call it now like the stunt woman mentality, because they like go through all the craziest stuff. And then when the producers ask them like, you good? You just got hit by a car. And they're just like,
yeah, what does good mean?
Yeah, we're good. But you shouldn't have to do that, or that's not a great culture to be in as a young dancer, to like develop and grow. But to your point, right? Like in terms of recovery from a team setting, right? Like it really will depend on how it was managed even before that week. We're talking about the same week, right? So it's how is the team coming in from the following weeks? So we know from like a medical side that acute or chronic nervous system burnout, right? That is not within a week's time. That's going to take months maybe. And if it's like severe burnout, like maybe years. But again, like that's when I bring it back to the resilience piece, because they're young, they're dancers, and they're trying to figure out if dance is like for them. And this is what they want to keep doing. Right. So everyone's coming in the week. What's the nervous system load like? What's like the physical load like? So you're going to have some dancers who are, a little bit more fit to dance. Some who feel like, shoot, like I'm coming in and I don't know, I'm already feeling some aches, pains, bruises, and bumps. And then you have others who are already on like the injury reserve, or like trying to reintegrate back in, maybe from past injury. So that's a lot to handle. But when it comes down to the week, that's why I feel like a lot of it is conversation with like the coach and performing and the staff of like, who is going to perform? What is the final roster like? And also, what still needs to be done? And what is the cost of us doing that, right? Like I remember when I was dancing, and, for the hip hop dance community scene, we had like Hell Weeks.
Yes.
Which was like, you have a performance on Saturday, you might be staying up till 3-4 in the morning the same week.
Yes.
Right.
I remember I was also in that community that was that was like late 2000s, early 2010s ish. And I was very fortunate to be on a more exhibition team, if you will. Shout out to Boogie's Own Breed. That rings any bells. Oh God. But I would see my friends that would be on the competing teams, and I'd see them at the same competition venues that we would be performing at. And I'd be like, hey, like, how's it going? And they literally look like they just like, they're dead. They're pale. They're just kind of like, very like fatigued, and they're like, oh, we're good. We're going to go do another run through. And I was, you guys.
So if you're in that boat, right, that's where the stuff you would do, the decisions you'd make that would be beneficial for health is not the same decisions you would make for performance, right? So if I was, quote unquote, the staff back then, and we all understand the goal is to win first place, I'm not going to be the guy I recommend, like, you should probably like sleep for the day, like take it off, because everyone signed up for it. We're there,
you're there,
right? So you have to make it work.
Yeah.
Which means, it brings back the conversation to like, sport is inherently dangerous to participate in physical activity. So yes, if there's an injury, we could go back and be like, well, it's because of this and cause this. But that was part of the admission ticket to participate.
Yeah.
And which means that you have to go through the learning and experience lesson. of that after. So I feel less guilty about my role
Yes.
when it comes to that point, and the decisions that were made leading up to that point have resulted in this.
Yeah.
Because I can no longer change the accumulation of load that's within their body, so that's a lot of like acute pain management stuff. We're doing like the biofreeze, we're trying to do massages, we're doing like nutrition, like, okay, take some like pre-caffeine before this, like let's try and like plan this out. Let's try and do some active stress, manual therapy, like anything to kind of like help regulate the nervous system allostatic balance to get them.
Which is where, and this is just, speaking from my personal experience working with dancers who have to navigate injury because they've signed up for it. And it's like, we can't, well, depending on the situation, but there have been circumstances where we just kind of got to do it and we do our best. But I think with everything you mentioned is where I think the recovery conversation is stuck. Everyone thinks about recovery as like, I'm feeling like crap already. What can I do to feel better? Right. And like you said, it's the experience. And so how do you go from I feel like crap to I feel better and have them understand that versus just being able to say, hey, I just feel good all the time. Right. Because so anyway,
I mean, to that point, that I feel good all the time is personally for me, like if you're really working hard, training hard, you're not feeling good all the time. So if you are, you're either on drugs, you're not training that hard, or you're not in an environment that's like pushing you. But again, when you're younger and you do have the benefit of biology on your side, like, I know people that, in all different sports would be like, when I was like in my high school years, college years, I could play back-to-back games, so all this, sleep the next day, feel good, do it again. And great, like do what you got to do. But when it comes to like the recovery stuff like that, I think there is a conversation to be had. It's like, did you earn it or not? Especially when we get to the elite levels. When we're talking about like the younger kids, there's probably something else going on in the picture if they're not bouncing back faster.
Yeah.
Whether it's from like a blood chemistry level or like overtraining, overuse, like I would say that's a little more unnatural. I would expect it from like my 25-year-old who's like playing NBA games, traveling, making all these trips, also managing like work and life, and they're feeling sore and they're not being able to bounce back as fast, and we have to do all this stuff. But I would feel like there's some other lever that's being cranked up too high in the younger dancer that is like making their bodies like feel this way.
Yes.
On a like consistent, almost like chronic level. That shouldn't be normal. Or that shouldn't be normal.
Yes. All the management. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were mentioning, and I think this might be helpful to kind of look at it from a time perspective, right? If you're a dance educator or you're a coach and you are running a team, or there is sort of these end game things that we have to adhere to. So either a competition or a performance, things that you're doing in like the day of. Right? The day of might be, like you were mentioning, the nutritional aspect, being able to keep things running, the Theragun work that you keep in your dance bag.
Yeah, let's go through it.
Yeah.
Let's go through it. So obviously, day of comp, you're prepping, your prep for that happened yesterday, right? What you're choosing to eat, how much sleep you're getting, the environment, the headspace that you're in. Ideally, it's like, you're eating enough calories. You're not really changing your diet that much. You really shouldn't day of. You try and set yourself up for like a really good day. So I think dancers, if you don't have like a ritual yet or things of like, that you need to do to get you and like feeling good. Like when I was a kid, there was like, I'm going to wear like my special socks, like prep them the night before. And then when I wake up, I could just like wear them and feel good. It's like, these little things that athletes do, prepare ahead of time. You don't want to be the one that like wakes up the day of and like you oversleep from your alarm and you're like rushing, you don't get a bite to eat before you leave for the day. You're missing stuff in your bag and you just hope that it's going to work out. Like that
Hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy. And, perceived and real stress is still stress on the body too. And you don't need another layer of stress to show up on day of. You're like, shoot, like I forgot my belt for my costume. I'm like, now you're like scrambling. That time you spent scrambling could have been time getting in your zone, right? So how do you like reduce the extra extraneous stress that, would be there? You try and take care of the day before. Right? And look, day of, again, like you have to look at the schedule. What's like the run of show? What's the transportation like? How long is it going to take to get there? Once you figure out like transport, where you got to be at what time, then you work your like nutrition and recovery in it. You got to be in a car an hour next to your competition. Maybe you can massage gun while you're in the car, do your stretches so that when you get off, it's not like you haven't been sitting in one spot. It's like, don't just zone out on your phone, play video games. And like, if it's a crowded car, then like, okay, then your options are limited. So now you have to like set up that time and space. You would have done that and allocate it somewhere else. So it's like, how do you create these pockets of time that are your time?
Yes.
Right? Because once you arrive, you're going to be on the company's time. You're going to be on the competition schedule time. And those are the times that like, it's just baked into your day. So you kind of have to like work around it. Nutrition timing is super important. I always tell them, make sure you got snacks. I know when we were at the Olympics, we had a dietitian there that would provide the snacks that we could give out to the athletes. So we're doing like, mostly get like quick carbohydrates from them, fruits, honey stingers, gummies, gels. Some of our performers really like candy. So that's like these like quick stuff so that when they're, feeling a little low, they've had to rehearse and do tech a few times or whatever, like you can keep that in your pocket. Give you a little boost, stay cognitively aware, physically aware. And then night before, usually if someone's really sore, we give them tart cherry juice as well. And, some performers really like it. Some don't feel like it makes a difference. Some people really like the physical modality stuff, like the contrast bath, cold, hot. Some people really like the Normatec boots that feel the pressure moving up. So I think you have to learn, like, obviously what's in your budget, what you have time for and what you can take with you. But that's all stuff that, they do before, then day of. It's really like, there's not anything you can do from like training or like technical side. It's kind of, you have to show up.
Yeah.
So control what you can, which is like your mental, your food, your nutrition timing, make sure you have everything you need, reduce your stress levels, and like also just be open to like ebb and flow, because if there's going to be a natural chaos that's there on competition day,
which is where your resilience comes.
Where it's a resilience, right? Like the dancer that has a really rigid mindset that it needs to be this way or no way is going to struggle. But also the dancer who's just like flying by the seat of their pants is going to be like, if they didn't have a team where people look after them, they'd be kind of screwed. So I think that's where, like, in a company perspective, like, you'll see these different personalities and like see how they like work together or not work together, and ultimately like influences the experience they feel after.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's like I feel like all the things you just talked about right now, typically whenever we are having this recovery conversation with parents and dancers, they're like, should I what do you think about massage guns? What should I buy a pair of recovery boots, right? What do you think about like these kinds of like supplements, et cetera? And we're constantly looking for, we're equating what we can do in a short period of time with also applicable in a long period, which it can be, but just depending on what you're talking about, like recovering from a day of rehearsal, recovering from a hard practice, things like that. But all of these things really are more about like in the moment.
In the moment, yeah.
And so then in order for in the moment recovery to make sense and for it to actually work to the best of its ability, what are we thinking about, let's say, a week, 2 weeks ahead of time? So you're a dance teacher, you're a coach, and you know that you have 2 weeks or maybe like a week.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel like is most optimal for this conversation. But there's a much more significant period of time. So you have in the moment recovery. How do I set myself up for in the moment recovery, but within a week's or with 2 weeks span?
I think 2 weeks would be probably an easier way to think about it. I guess like if you're the instructor, you're really trying to manage like, your objectives of like what needs to be done in terms of the work for the dancer, the overall workload. Like, are we finished with this piece yet? Is this, group or choreography where we need it to be, right?
That's true. I was going to say, I've stepped off, and this is professionally, I've stepped off a plane, been at the venue, shows the next day, and suddenly we have a new piece we need to learn. So no, once again, just realities.
It's the reality of it, right? Like those are the big contextual influences on like, does it push you to be like, I can be a dancer that I don't have to like, try these short-term hacks for recovery, or can I be a little bit more like, do I have a little bit more space and more time to get things that will actually like help me heal a little more, right? And so if we're thinking about like the 2-week time window, right? I would say, especially for like younger dancers, like that's 2 weeks ago, that's probably, if they are thinking about trying to figure out what nutrition stuff is working for them, what supplements are working for them, what recovery modalities are working for them, that's probably the best window to do it. Because ideally, you should be working really hard, still training, and also like tapering from maybe some like cross training stuff that you're doing, whether it's like in the strength room or like, your other sports or other physical activity stuff that they're doing.
And if you're an educator or a teacher, tapering is basically bringing down your load a little bit so the body can have a little bit of time to recover before you hit the competitive.
Ideal situation is that other people taper for you and you can focus on bringing the best in the studio, in the dance for them, and then get the most out of your dancers. The dancers themselves need to be sleeping, need to be eating, need to be, need to be feeling like they're ready, like the confidence in their abilities too. So they may need some like extra coaching on the side, or, if you're training hard, like some people will hit a breaking point.
Yeah.
And may need some reassurance that things are going to be okay, and that, you can promise them like they can work hard here. And then coming into like the final week before show, it's just like spot work, maintenance, right? The pressure is not there to where like they feel like they need to keep redlining for you.
Yeah.
Right. And that will give the dancer ability to like, try all these other modalities. And if they don't have access to those modalities, to like give them a one full day, mental day where they can like go out, get into nature, get some sunlight. Because I think we also forget that, dance is an indoor sport and we don't get the benefit of like natural sunlight. We don't get the benefit of moving air. We don't get the benefit of like being outdoors and the healing benefits that also has.
Yeah.
Again, if you're like in the inner city and you're like, I can't even do that, then just go take a walk around the park and like enjoy some time with your friends. And like, I think dancers need to have time to decompress for themselves, because when things are moving really fast, they're probably going to be the ones that be like, I have to do this. They may not even know that it's beneficial for them. Right.
Yeah, we were talking about there's a good body of science and understanding of how sunlight and the warmth and the heat helps to reset and reorganize biorhythms and things of those sorts. So I had a lot of dancers that were, for us here in LA, going out to New York or perhaps going to different countries. And so part of the conversation that I was having with many of them was, even though it's a 0 time difference, you're like, oh, it's really not that bad, but it will still make a difference, right? Because if you're in, obviously if you're in Florida or anywhere on the East Coast and you have something that starts at 9 a.m., that means it's 5, 6 a.m. here. And so that was one of the things I tell them to do is go out and get some sun, right? And just that simple sun exposure can help reset your clocks just a little bit more efficiently than not. So, yeah.
I know coaches that when they're preparing for like the Tokyo Olympics, like they would prepare their team at the same time frame that they would compete at Tokyo.
Yeah.
Like, 2 weeks to a week before.
Yeah.
Just to get them acclimated and they get them like used to the time change when they got there.
Yeah.
To reduce how much acclimation time they would have. So it's like, again, like you said, to your point, biorhythms and like, when your body feels like awake and when your hormones are released for like activity and stuff, like really do matter.
Yes. So I think, being able to set yourself up within that you were saying about like 1 to 2 week period, so your recovery can be that much more effective during those moments. So I know this is kind of in reference to, we just use the example of like 1. Now, we know that with the way dance is structured currently with the once again, the dance learning experience, whether that's competition or shows and things of the sort, it's often back to back, right?
Yeah.
Something I learned this year working with a specific ballet studio was, and we're trying to apply this idea of like periodization and things like that. Initially, I was thinking that the fall would be a little bit more difficult to organize and sort of, quote unquote periodize. And I say quote unquote periodize because it's still very hard to apply that concept broadly. So just to give you an idea, if I'm thinking about a ballet studio in Southern California from 2024 to 2025, right? In the fall usually is, you're back to you're training, but there's one focus, which generally speaking is going to be like a nutcracker, right? And you may have some early renditions of a competition, but it's also not that serious. And so people are kind of like, not that it's a throwaway, but you're kind of like, oh, this is just to get my feet wet. But you come into spring, and that's when you have summer intensive auditions in January. You have, college auditions as well. The competitions are ramping up, and depending on how you do, you might feel like you stack a couple other ones to increase your chances at like a better score, right?
Sure.
So then you're flying around to different places, and then suddenly you do really well. And so once again, going back to that previous conversation of travel, you're going to the East Coast, you're participating in finals, and on top of that, you're having to do all of school, other extracurriculars, other community things, and being a child, right? So the only time that I feel like we were really truly able to build any sort of capacity was, and for the rest of the year, was between September and November, because that's all they really had to be consistent. And from January up until last month, when school was out and everyone's having shows, it was week by week, where like, how are you feeling today? All of a sudden, back-to-back shows, stuff like that. So there was no opportunity to build capacity. I bring this up to say, we know that there's week after week after week after week, and we can only set ourselves up ahead of time. So what does that look like? I think we all know what that should look like.
Sure.
But,
in reality.
Your reality. And I like what you had said earlier. We talk about checklists and perhaps like habits and things like that, but rituals. I think rituals is something to really hit on and build upon, because it's not just about I need to do this to optimize. It's I need to do this to our rituals are what makes us human, right? Even in like a cultural sense, right?
Agreed.
So I kind of want to hang on to that word a little bit. I think I might do that from this point on too.
Okay.
Yeah. Thoughts.
A lot of thoughts. It sounds like, to make it relatable, like that's from like January to the summer is like a dancer's quote unquote in season.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is where
the equivalent of
the focus is going to be on performance. Like they need to like have outcomes. Right. And I think if that's the case, then you have fall and winter to build whatever needs to be built. Unfortunately, if you have an injury, that means if your injury can't be resolved during that time, it's going to be a very hard season, right? So as parents, as instructors, when you're preparing for the next season, they have to keep that in mind of like, and again, I think that's not that I'm biased or anything, but there's a little bias, is like there should be a push and a focus to get them as close to performance ready with a PT or anyone on their healthcare team. What? One being an athletic trainer, of course, but like I think PTs are more readily accessible for this kind of work. To get them back to a strong, healthy baseline so that they can begin like training. There's a choice that can be made.
I like that. Yes, absolutely.
If you want to be a dancer that is like following what you're supposed to do and what the culture tells you to do, and to be like accepted and be like, I'm cool, I'm part of the group. And there's also another conversation to be like, I'm doing this to have a career and a life, which means my decisions also have to match that. And that may be an early choice this dancer has to make. But know that the cost of that will be like social ostracization, or like people may not understanding why you're making said choices.
Yes.
Right. So for example, like, you could be the dancer that's like, I'm going to invest money into or a coach on top of my regular dance training during the fall and the season, which means like I'm not going to be able to go to so-and-so's birthday party that's like this late, or I may not be able to spend all this time taking other classes that may be of interest because I'm focused on this part, versus like the other dancers, like, oh, like so-and-so's here, I'm gonna take their class. Oh, like I'm just gonna like chill out, go to school, only show up to, rehearsal when I need to, get ready for Nutcracker. Like, I think the intention behind it on both extremes are like kind of different in how it's set up, because on the one end, we could say that the dancer that's like committed and, raised the bar in the fall and winter time will have an easier time transitioning into January and February than the one who is doing that gets off of like holiday break and then is like thrown into the wind. Right. And I think a lot of it is like, what is kind of goes back, what is the goal? Right? What is the goal? What are we preparing for? And how do you reverse engineer it back? I think both dancers, though, need to understand that, and this is a concept I took from CrossFit from Coach Chris Shaw about building an aerobic base and this idea of aerobic capacity. If your like zone 2 cardiovascular fitness is really high, your recovery in between sets, in between competitions is much higher. So you're able to handle more workload, right? So really it's like, how do you build the capacity to become like a workhorse? And it doesn't mean that you have to be that off in the beginning. You just have to raise it a little bit more. Yeah. Because once you're in season, you're like losing. You're losing fitness. Right? And this is the struggle that NFL guys, NBA guys have all the time. I talk to their strength coaches, they're trying to like microdose strength sessions here and there, prevent injuries when they can, but because they're on their feet, because they're playing so much, getting hit, whatever, like their health. If you were to put like an HP bar for my gamers out there,
yes,
it's like a little.
Oh, yo, yeah.
And then they get some time, and then maybe they might come up, but like they have to use that bar for the whole season, right? So it's like savings, right? Like you save up enough money for hard times, and then hopefully you're not going into debt.
Yeah.
And if you are going in debt, then when you're not constantly pulling out, then you have to like rebuild that.
Yeah.
So it's a war of attrition, really.
Yeah. No, that's a great analogy too, right? Because you can keep the analogy we'll use often is that you can keep swiping that card, but whether you have like $1,000 or $1 in your bank account, it's like you don't really know.
I know.
But once you do that one little thing, right? And sometimes we attribute that one little swipe to the thing that took it all down. You're like, oh, I stepped wrong. Is it just about like my leg strength or something? You know what I mean? Or is I did this one dance move. Is this one dance move dangerous now? Or I don't know, it's like we want to assign meaning to things to give us like solace in having control over the things that we can have control. But then you're looking at, okay, great. It wasn't about that one swipe. It's about the 500 other swipes right before. I think about kind of similar, and this goes back to a Peter Tierney article I read, which, by the way, if you haven't been familiar with Dr. Peter Tierney's work, there's which I'm all for frameworks, and I am a sucker for like awesome acronyms, and I think the way he has organized everything is like, well, so
pretty nice.
Yes. So yes, you can look it up, and then we'll maybe hit on that a little bit. But I can't remember if this was directly attributed to him or if it was just in the article that he was mentioning. But there's recovery as if you're training, say 4 or 5 hours a day. What's your other 20? Your other 19, 20 hours, and that too is your training, right? And so being able to see it not as like something outside of training, but that it's definitely just like part of the picture of just how you exist as a person.
I agree.
So yeah. So once again, going back to that idea of everything is you're just trying to fight the bar, the HP bar, yo.
Yeah. Potions.
Fortunately, no one-up mushrooms here. I don't know. Hi everyone, and thanks for listening to part 1 of Reframing Recovery. Stay tuned as we continue the conversation in part 2, and we're looking forward to sharing the conversation with you there as well. All right, take it easy.